All right, good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. I just want to welcome everybody, and we want to thank everybody for joining us this morning, and we really want to help foster an inclusive space, so we want to take a moment to recognize our diversity on this talk. We'd like to welcome all genders, sexual orientations, and religions. And in that note, if people want to actually add their pronouns to their Zoom name, that would be appreciated. You can just go to your picture or your name, and there's a little, there should be a little more button, like little 3 things, and you can rename yourself and add your pronouns if you would like to. Having some technical difficulties. We just want to welcome everybody that have disabilities, visible or invisible, native and non-native speakers who are calling from all over the place, we hope. People who identify as activists and people who don't. And please, in the chat box, please do feel free to say where you're from, where you're calling in from, anything else you want to share with folks. And we'd also like to welcome the ancestors who lived on this land, and so we'd like to share our land acknowledgement. We at NARN acknowledge that we occupy the unceded indigenous land, the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples. We honor the Duwamish people in the past and present, and in honor and gratitude to the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. If you're interested in learning more and also paying rent to the Duwamish, you can check out the website realrentduwamish.org. So we encourage each of you to learn and acknowledge the land that you're on. If you want to go to the, thank you. So we also just have an anti-harassment policy for all of our events. You can check out our link for more information, but we just want to make sure that everyone feels safe and welcome in all of our events. So throughout the webinar, we do ask that people are going to keep their microphones muted just to help prevent any background noise and disruptions. If you're having any trouble during the presentation, please let us know and we'll do our best to adjust during this presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, which I'm really excited about, actually. So Fernando is giving a talk, as you know, and I think I've known Fernando for probably like 10 years now. The time kind of flies. But I first met him and his amazing partner, Christina, at a little fundraiser for a local animal sanctuary. And since then, he has found ways to connect with all sorts of different animal activist groups. He's always learning more about how he can get involved and ways that he can contribute. He's volunteered for more groups than I can count. I think the latest one was the local group for Food Empowerment Project. Fernando is probably one of the humblest and nicest and smartest people I know. And so I'm just really thrilled that he has given us the opportunity to host this talk, which I'm very interested in. So I'm sure it'll be amazing. Fernando, please take it away. I'm just going to take a minute to stop the screen sharing so you can show your slides. Let's see here. Okay. Fernando, I believe you can probably share your slides now.
Yep.
Great.
Okay, so everybody can see that?
Yep.
And I guess since somebody answered, they can hear me too. So thanks, Rachel. I really appreciate what you just said. And thank you, NARN, for letting me do this. I've had the idea of doing this for quite a few years now, and but the opportunity presented thanks to, or unfortunately, thanks to COVID. And so we can do this virtually, which is great because a lot of more people can join from all over the world. Before I start, I want to do another land acknowledgement for the Muisca people, which is the native people where the city of Bogota, where I was born, used to live. And in general, all the Chibcha speaking people, which are all the most of the tribes, native tribes in what is now Colombia. Um, so I promise this is not as academic as it sounds. I know I picked a very academic sounding title, but just a full disclosure, uh, I'm not a sociologist or a historian. I'm actually an engineer, and this is just my experience of doing activism back in Colombia. And also, I want to acknowledge I'm a Colombian, so I'm just one out of 40 something million. So other people may have had different experiences. They had more violence, less violence, and so on. So you probably find people who disagree with some of this stuff, and that's fine. Just a content warning. I don't have any graphic images in these slides, neither animals or humans. But we are going to be talking about stuff that's not pleasant, violence, war, that killings, things like that. So just wanted to give you that, guys. That an outline. I'm big on outlines. So I'm just go through a little bit of background. How did I end up doing animal rights in Colombia? And that experience, I had a very eye-opening experience the first time I did outreach. Then we're gonna go, why is a country at war? And I'll talk about Verdadera Compasión, which is an organization I helped co-found back home. Safety and activism. We'll go over aren't things better now? Things have changed down there in the recent past. And what does it have to do with me? And we'll have a Q&A. So if you have questions, it will be great if you wait until the end. That way I have a lot of stuff to cover. I hope not to be speaking for more than like 50 minutes, and then we can spend the rest of the time discussing, which I think is where most of the good stuff actually happens. So let's go. Background. That's a map of Central South America. And as most messed up stories in the Americas, they start in 1492. Columbus gets lost, lands in what is modern day Dominican Republic. In 1499, the Spaniards reach Cabo de la Vela, which is one of the most northern parts in modern Colombia. 1537, they go inland into Muisca territory, looking for El Dorado. El Dorado was this legend about a city made out of gold. The city doesn't exist. The legend most likely has to do with a ritual, a coronation ritual the Muiscas had, in which gold offerings were thrown into a lake every time they had a new leader. So they reached the territory 1537, looking for the city of gold. In 1538, the city of Bogota is founded. The name Bogota comes from the native name of the region, which is Bacata. And in 1540, the last of the Muisca leaders are killed, and then it was absorbed into it became a Spanish colony. Fast forward to 1979, and that's the year I was born in Bogota. I was born there. So we finally kicked the Spaniards out in 1819. So they were there for 320 years. but they left behind their language. So we speak Spanish down there, and their religion. Most people are Catholic. Cultural traditions, including this one, bullfighting. So, and that's the bullfighting arena in Bogota. Um, Colombia is one of the few countries that still does bullfighting, or what is called Spanish bullfighting. There is another type called Portuguese bullfighting, in which they don't kill the bull. Um, so, and that's how I ended up into getting involved into animal rights. So I was involved. I got involved in anti-bullfighting campaigns. So there were campaigns to either not necessarily outright ban the bullfight. We kind of knew there was a fight that we couldn't win. And I remember there was a campaign to make the bullfight an 18 and over event. Uh, Bullfights are open to everybody, any age, so kids can go in there and watch this. Um, Weirdly, bullfights are considered a sport. So if you ever look at the newspaper or the TV news, it's always in the sports section. Um, so I was giving leaflets. We were trying to get the city to pass an ordinance to make the bullfight 18 and over. Um, then I give a leaflet to this guy, and he asked me if I ate meat, and I told him yeah, and he basically he replied, why do you do that? And I told him, well, it's different to kill animals for food than to kill animals for entertainment. And he told me that difference only exists for you. Just think about it. And he walked away, and it was probably the most significant 30 seconds of my life. um, I don't know who he was. I never saw him again. But I thought about it, like he told me, and I decided he was right. And about a week later, I stopped eating animals, and that was my gateway into animal rights, bullfighting. Bullfighting was banned for a few years in the city, not in the country. Um, but there was a lawsuit. The bullfighting people won, and they brought it back. So to this day, there's still a bullfighting season in Bogota every year. So I stopped eating meat. I went vegan. I started thinking about doing activism and doing outreach, and I didn't know anybody who did outreach. Like I knew people in the other groups, in the anti-bullfighting groups and all that, and but I didn't know anybody who did outreach. So I started looking into talking about going vegan, talking to people about like vegan outreach. And I reached out to Vegan Outreach and PETA, and they sent me information in Spanish. I got all these booklets and leaflets. And so one day I go to this mall on the left. Um, and this was by myself. I picked it up just out of convenience because my mom used to work nearby. I was in college. I lived in at home when I was in college, so we would go home together. So she was busy at work, so I went out to give leaflets out of this shopping mall by myself, um, and then most people are not paying attention. Uh, and but then this guy reads the leaflet and he stops and he comes back and he's like furious. He's yelling at me like, "How can you be doing this? How can you be telling people that they need to care about animals when there is so many people dying out there?" And I didn't get this just from that guy at that time, but I got that repeatedly after. So I was stumped. I didn't know what to say. It was my first time. So he walked away all angry with me, and then I started thinking, there, how can I answer this question? And the first realization I had, and I know that uh, most of us who have been involved in animal rights uh, have gotten this question before. But the difference was that for example, when I get this question in the United States, um, how can I care about people when about animals when people die out there? They're out there is a very nebulous, abstract thing out there. But then I came to the realization that for us, out there meant right here. So this is the same location, same shopping mall. The picture is actually taken facing the other way. So basically from the shopping mall to the street. Uh, April 1993. Car bomb went off, killed 9 people, injured 242. So that's when I first started thinking, how is this all related? The first thing I had to accept, and it's a hard thing to accept as an animal person, is that there is people who have witnessed and suffered enough violence that they really don't care about animals. Or I know that we tend to think like everybody cares about animals at some point, but I don't think that's true. I think some people have suffered so much that they just don't have it in them to care about animals. But that didn't mean I wanted to find an answer on how can I relate this animal struggle to them. So what did this car bomb had to do with? So it had to do with what I call the first war on drugs, or the war on drugs 1.0. Had to do with this guy, which is most of you probably know who this is. Uh, that's Pablo Escobar, and he was all he wanted to do was sell cocaine to everybody who would buy it and just get rich. Um, but then there were these two guys, and they were like, "No, we're not gonna let you do that." And that's Ronald Reagan and George Bush. So that's when the 1980s, early 90s drug war escalated because of the drug war, thanks to these two guys. So that drug war was about controlling the business. Um, it wasn't about drugs or safety. It never has been. Um, but it was like they're making a whole lot of money. Pablo Escobar was actually the fifth, at some point, he was the fifth richest person in the world. They were making incredible amounts of money selling cocaine. And the US government didn't like that because that money was leaving the US economy. They were just shipping it back to Colombia where they had to hide it, really. Um, so they didn't like that. Um, and a lot of the violence came after the US demanded the Colombian government pass this extradition treaty so that drug traffickers uh, would face trial and go to jail in the United States. The drug traffickers, the Medellin cartel, didn't like that. And what they did is they launched this war against the state um, to prevent the government from passing that extradition treaty. And that's what all the car bombs and all the violence were really about. Um, so that was the overt drug war. There was military aid, lots of money, equipment given to the US, to the Colombian government to fight wars. There was also the covert war on drugs, which was money laundering. So after the war escalated, moving drug money became really hard. Um, so a lot of the money from cocaine ended up staying in the United States. They couldn't ship it back, so it would be laundered through a U.S. bank and stay in the U.S. economy, which was really, at least in my opinion, what they wanted out of the war. There was also, they funded paramilitary activity. This group called Los Pepes, which is an acronym in Spanish that translates to people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. And what they did was they gathered all the people who were enemies of Escobar, and they supplied them with weapons and money to hunt him down. That went out of control after a while, and I'll go over that later. But the drug war is only a little bit of a very complex thing, and it doesn't really relate what's happening to people with what happens to animals back in Colombia. So it was just a piece, but not the answer. So I went back to really ask the question: why is my country at war? And that's a really we're a question to ask yourself, right? Because we never went to school. Nobody ever taught us why are we at war. Nobody ever said that. We were never told this is what's going on. We were just knew there were bad guys and good guys, and there were shootings and bombs and all this other stuff, but nobody ever told us why. So I went back to the very basics. So I started with a book that, if you know me, I talk about this book over and over again. And this book is called The Open Veins of Latin America. And it's written by an Uruguayan journalist called Eduardo Galeano. And if you're wondering why that book is so messed up, is that it's my copy. And over the years, it just got obliterated from looking through it. But what I learned from this book, and actually Galeano later in life said he shouldn't have written it, which is the only thing I've ever disagreed with him on. So the things I learned from this book, it was that the occupation, or what they call the conquest of the Americas, was the largest land grab in history. And what happened was the Spanish crown had very simple rules when it came to occupying land in the Americas. The first rule they came up with is like, this is nobody's land. Tierra de nadie in Spanish. Like this belongs to no one. So just from the get-go, they dismissed the fact that there were native people who had been living there. And the other excuse they made was that they were converting people to Christianity. So that natives were not Christians, and it was their call to occupy these lands to convert them to Christianity. So this became, what happened was a very large swaths of land became the possession of very few people, the conquistadors, the people that would go and do these expeditions. And this structure is known in Spanish as latifundio, and the best translation for that is a large holding of land, or like big ranches. But that was a long time ago, but it has modern consequences. So we have a study from Oxfam released in 2016. In Colombia, 0.4% of the farmlands of the farms hold over 60% of the actual land. Is only 0.4% of holdings. Another one from another article in 2015, 44.7% of peasants live under the poverty line. So that's a consequence of the large holding. It basically means that if you're a small farmer, you cannot compete, which in turn means that the large holding expands, because a lot of people end up selling their land to the big farm. So the big farm expands, and the new person, just instead of owning land, becomes an employee and is usually under the poverty line. Now think about this. Colombia is a country where the GDP is about $1,500 a year. So the poverty line down there is the misery line. Is like they have nothing. So in short, very few people in Colombia own a lot of the agricultural land. But what is the land used for? So this National Agricultural Survey 2013 reported that 80% of the agricultural land in Colombia is used for cattle ranching. So most of the farms that are owned by very few people are cattle. These people are cattle ranchers. That's what they do. So now we're getting somewhere with the land, right? So I try to paint the conflict in Colombia is very complex. You can actually take a university course, 6 months, and just discuss this. But I will try to simplify a little bit. So if the conflict is like this triangle, so because of these issues with land distribution, in the 60s, there were Marxist guerrillas were formed, and one of their demands has always been, we want reform of land ownership. We want redistribution of land, because they recognize that structure generates a lot of poverty. So you have the FARC, they're pretty famous, and the ELN. They were both founded in 1964. The FARC came from a peasant uprising led by a guy named Manuel Marulanda. And the ELN was more like, it's more philosophical. It was a lot of university students that who had seen what had happened in Cuba, what was all these Marxist revolutions around the world, and they started their own group. It's much, much smaller. ELN stands in Spanish for Army of National Liberation. So against this, they fight against the state, right? The armed forces of the state. So Colombia has always been, it's a right-wing country. You can see that the evidence for that is that Colombia was spared from all these dictatorships that were in South America in the 70s and 80s. Pinochet and Videla in Argentina. Our last dictator was in 1954. But Colombia is really what they call a soft dictatorship, or a word Galeano coined, which is democradura, which is joining the words of democracy and dictatorship. So it's a democracy on paper, but there is a lot of restrictions in civil liberties and things like that. So it's not really a democracy. So obviously the state, the elite in Colombia owns a lot of land, so they're not going to give up their land, so they fight each other. And then there is an external factor, the United States government. So this was, back in Cold War days. So the CIA and the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, they force policies, they make demands, they give military aid, and that's how they get involved. But then the war starts getting like really dirty, and there are things that the government cannot really do without people asking questions. So people started forming paramilitary groups. The word paramilitary, if you know, think about it as pseudo military. So it's an unofficial armed group that has like military structure, chain of command and this whole thing. So there is a few big military groups, Los Pepes, as I just said, which were funded by the DEA just to fund to hunt for Escobar. After Escobar was killed, then they became a paramilitary group defending the land from the guerrillas, like that. Those were their enemies. So you can see, so the red arrows means that they fight each other. After a while, they were illegal, actually. So Los Pepes was an illegal group. After a while, they formed legal paramilitary groups in a region in Colombia, in Antioquia. This was by Uribe Vélez, who then became president of Colombia in 2002. And all these groups finally became the AUC, which stands for United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia. So they don't fight the government, and this actually is a two-headed arrow, because a lot of people in the army, in the armed forces, are also involved in paramilitary activity. Paramilitaries are technically illegal. They are also considered a terrorist organization. So when the dirty work needs to get done, they get the silent cooperation of the army. And then to make it even more like messier, then there is this leaf. So that's coca leaf. Coca is a plant that is native to Western South America. Has been used by natives for like 8,000 years. It gives them energy. You can use it to help altitude sickness. A lot of these tribes live in like 10, 12,000 feet up in the Andes. So everybody is involved in one way or another in drugs in Colombia. So somebody decides to, a long time ago, to purify the narcotic found in these leaves, which is cocaine, and they traffic that. So everybody's involved in this. So drug traffickers first started doing business with the guerrillas because their labs were hidden in the jungle. So the drug lords basically said, look, you take care of my lab and I'll give you money so you can fund your revolution. And after a while, the guerrillas kind of figure out, well, why don't we just cut the middleman and we can just traffic these drugs ourselves and take all the money for ourselves. And that's what they did. The paramilitaries are also involved in this for the same reason. They want financing for their war, and they also control their own labs, so and things like that, their own routes. And as we know, people in the government have been involved in drug trafficking. And this all benefits, as I said before, it benefits the United States for many reasons. One is like what I said about laundering money. And it also gives them an excuse to keep control of the region. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later in what I call the modern war on drugs. Okay, so this is very complex. It's a mess. And this is kind of the simplest I can put, simplest terms I found to kind of try to explain it. But we still haven't gotten to animals yet. So you remember that 80% of agricultural land, which was owned by cattle ranchers. Well, there's no secret, and this is only in Spanish, but there's no secret that cattle ranchers financed paramilitary groups. It has been documented many times. Even organizations that grew for cattle ranchers like Fedegan. Fedegan is a federation of ganaderos, which is cattle ranchers in Spanish. It has been confirmed that they were involved in financing and supporting paramilitary groups because cattle ranchers don't want to give up their land. Even so, to the point that this guy, Jorge Aníbal Bismal, who was the president of Fedegan, he is in prison right now for 9 years because it was proven that he was involved in supporting and had links to paramilitary groups. So cattle ranchers are involved in the war. And that was the answer. Finally, that's a connection. I could tell people like, look, okay, I understand. You don't care about animals. You care about people. You care about what's happening to us in this war. But at the same time, every time you sit down to eat, you give money to the people who are financing this war. So what you eat is linked to the war. It's linked to what happens to animals. And that was my door to go and talk to people about, like, when people told me about what the war was happening, I could tell them the war is also happening because of what we do to animals and what we do with this land. So in parallel to this, we were trying to do vegan outreach, right? So obviously all that lesson about how the war is linked to what we do to animals, it took a while for us to make that connection. In the meantime, we founded this organization, Verdadera Compasión, that translates to true compassion. And it was the first like true animal rights organization in Colombia. Before us, there were groups that talked about, for example, spay and neuter and cruelty to dogs, anti-bullfighting and things like that. But nobody was out there talking about like veganism and speciesism and how it was all connected, and how we needed like a whole approach, how veganism could like really solve all these problems or be a part of the solution of these problems. So my friend Diego, who is my best friend, and I, we came from that like punk DIY culture. So we said, well, nobody's talking about this, so we're gonna do it ourselves, and we started this organization. But our main aim was to bring veganism out of that subcultural context. So we knew vegans, they were all into like hardcore and punk and all that, but we wanted people, anybody, uh, to be open to the idea of veganism. So so we kind of put away, we didn't talk about this band is vegan, like none of that. It was all very like straightforward. Anybody can be vegan, um, in the sense that you don't need to participate. You need to be a member of a certain subculture to consider it, or a certain religion, or any of that. We learned lots of lessons in this. The biggest lesson we learned was that using outside literature, like I had done in the past, was a mistake. And I remember um, we used to show Meet Your Meat to people, and somebody turned around and said, "Well, that's what happens in the U.S. That, like, why should I care about this? It doesn't concern me." We know that that wasn't true. So we set up to we did a lot of research, because he was right. We didn't know what happened in Colombia. We didn't know what does a factory farm in Colombia look like. What does a slaughterhouse look like? Um, so we put in a lot of work. We figured out, for example, how many animals are killed in Colombia in a year. That number is about 400 million, 360 million of which are chicken. Um, we visited farms. We visited slaughterhouses, big industrial slaughterhouses and small town slaughterhouses. Um, what's interesting is that because of there was no precedent, so there was no fear of the animal rights activist. So all we had to say is like, look, we're from such and such school and we have a school project. Can we go film at the slaughterhouse? And people would say like, yeah, sure, like not a problem. And we would show up. It wasn't undercover or anything. We would show up with a camera, take pictures, and do all these things. And it was a pretty bad experience, but it had to be done. Um, but the group is not active anymore. We all kind of moved on. It was only active for a few years, probably 4 years. But what it did is the real legacy of the group was that it opened the door for other groups to talk about veganism. And lots of grassroots groups have been formed, and they come and go. International organizations have uh, entered in Colombia. Um, as a matter of fact, at some point, we got the attention of animal equality, and we had talks about turning our organization into animal equality in Colombia, which didn't happen. Um, but that was our biggest legacy. So here are some of the things we did. We went into farms and uh, took pictures and documented, what it looks like. It's actually very similar to uh, a U.S. factory farm, um, except for cattle is more like extensive ranching. So cattle are not confined real tight, like in an operation like here. Um, and I wanted to highlight this picture on the bottom right is that it's a little different down there in the sense of this is a picture of the website of the biggest slaughterhouse in the country. So here we don't even know what the slaughterhouses are. They're hidden. You cannot go to a factory farm. It's like there's no address, nothing. There is like here is the slaughterhouse. Here is where it is. You can come see. There's pictures of the inside, and this is what we do, and such and such. Uh, Obviously, the pictures are very clean, but it's not as hidden as here in the U.S. We try to put this ad in the newspaper, and it says we fight for those kidnapped in farms. Animal liberation now. That's a pretty cringy to me to look at it now, but it is what we try to do. Kidnapping is a big thing in Colombia. Is a lot of the groups used to do that to finance their operations. So um, it was very unsafe to travel by land. Drive from city to city in Colombia. It was a big possibility you would get kidnapped, and your family would have to pay a lot of money to get you back. Um, So the newspaper actually rejected our ad. They said they weren't going to publish it. It didn't matter if we had the money or not. Um, and another big thing that we did, we created a vegan guide or a vegetarian guide for the city. And well, so we compiled all these restaurants that were vegan or vegetarian and had vegan options. We put it all in a booklet, and that actually got a lot of views. Lots of tourists would sometimes email us and say, I'm vegan in the UK and I'm going to Colombia. Where can I eat? And we would send them this. So that was pretty useful. So let's talk about safety and activism. So safety was always in our mind when we started doing our group. I remember we had a meeting before we had published anything, and we said, we're talking about things that people in power, people who have no qualms about killing other people, they're against that. We're talking against them. Are we sure this is a good idea? And we had also experienced police brutality at anti-bullfighting protests. Actually, one of our friends at an anti-bullfighting protest, the protest got a little bit out of control. He was taking pictures of what the cops were doing, and he got taken by the police. And we didn't see him for about 3 days. He showed up. He told us how he was driven out of the city to where the landfill is. There was this large landfill outside of the city, and he was sure he was gonna get killed. But by pure luck, where they pulled, somebody saw them and started like yelling about what they were doing, and the cops just dropped him out there and took his camera, and took his pictures. Um, so that was a real fear we had. So we decided to go forward, and everything was anonymous. So our website had no address, no contact, nobody's name, no pictures of us, like nothing. It was like somebody created this, and we don't know who they are. But then, so that hinders what you can do as an activist quite a bit, right? We couldn't do demos, we couldn't screen a film, do outreach. We were pretty much confined to the internet because that was the layer of anonymity that we felt safe with. In hindsight, there would have been ways to find out who we were even then. Website domain was registered to me under my name. They could have found that out. But then somebody from the newspaper, from that ad that got rejected, I guess that person found the ad or something, and they emailed us and they said, "Can you? What are you guys about? Why don't we do an interview?" And then when I sat down and said, "Okay, if we do this, it's out. Like we're gonna be out there. Our face, our names. What are we gonna do?" And we kind of like thought maybe we were being too cautious. We hadn't really received any threats or anything. So we went and we did the interview. And after that, it was public. Yeah, that was us. The interview was great. It was a great boost for us and for animal rights, really, in the country. It's like it was the equivalent of like being published in the New York Times here. It was the biggest newspaper in Colombia had this interview with us. Sadly, I don't have a copy of it. But after that, then we started doing more, right? Then it's like, okay, now we can do outreach and we can do a film screening and we can do a cooking demo and this and that. So we thought, oh, maybe we're just like overreacting, nothing's happening. But time would tell that we were not wrong. What happened is we were too small for anybody to pay attention. Yeah. So fast forward, so our group was active maybe until 2006 or so. I had already moved to the US. My friend Diego ended up moving to Brazil, and then it kind of died down from there. But if you, let's fast forward to 2016. So in 2008, Anima Naturalis, which is an organization based in Spain. They entered Colombia, so kind of like the same thing that Animal Equality had tried to do with us. Um, they entered Colombia. They became Anima Naturalis Colombia, and things kind of took off. There was a lot of momentum right about it. And in 2016, death threats were sent to animal rights activists by this paramilitary death squad known as the Black Eagles, Las Águilas Negras. And they basically said they left these papers at their homes, and they said you have 24 hours to leave the country, or we're gonna kill you. They were accused of being communists, of being associated with guerrillas, and all these other things. Two people I know in this list are friends of mine. Carlos Crespo, he was head of Resistencia Natural, which used to organize the big bullfighting campaigns in Colombia. And Andrea Padilla, who was the spokesperson of Animal Naturalis Colombia at the time, and she now is a Bogota councilwoman. So this was what we feared back then, but we were just like a little blimp. But as it became bigger, they finally paid attention, and what we thought was going to happen actually happened. It didn't happen to us, but it happened. So and this is true. I mean, these people, they kill people. It's a death squad. That's their job, their business. They did what I don't know what I would have done if I had gotten this, but what they did was really brave. They didn't leave. They went public. They had a press conference, and all of them got together, had a press conference, and they said, we got all these threats from these people, and they told us we have to leave. So if we get killed, now at least you know who's behind it. And they backed down. They didn't get killed, but it hasn't stopped there yet. Let's talk about Andrea, which is somebody I admire quite a bit. She ran for city council and became and got actually, I think, the second most votes of any candidate to go into the city council, which is amazing because she has not disguised the fact that that she cares about animals and that she's against the bullfights and against like pet shops keeping animals and things like that. So she's like public enemy number one for these cattle ranchers. So Fedegan, the same guys I was talking about before, published this, and they said she got to city council because she's linked to guerrillas. And in a country where the right wing is so powerful, being associated with guerrillas is a veiled like death threat. Really, there's like, if you're a communist, if you're leftist, you may get killed. This wasn't true. So she, being the brave person she is, she went and tweeted this and said, this is all not true. You guys are putting my life in danger by saying things like this. So if you have evidence, you better show it. Or she actually sued these guys. She's a lawyer. And she sued these guys. And but it got bad. It got bad to the point that Claudia Lopez, who is the mayor of the city, which is kind of like the second most important political office in the country, she even had to get involved and say like, hey, these guys are getting death threats because of things that you publish that are not true, and you have to retract. And this is like basically it's terrorism, really. Also, fun fact: Claudia Lopez is also the first openly. There's not only the first woman mayor, but also the first openly gay mayor of the city, which is great. So things have evolved. Things have moved on in Colombia at a good pace, I think. So before, when we started, I remember doing the the vegetarian guide for the city. We would go to restaurants and we would ask, is this vegan? And people didn't know what at the vegetarian restaurant they didn't know what vegan meant. Um, but now there's like you can see there's like vegan fairs and things like that. Anima Naturalis has done a lot of work in Colombia under the Andreas leadership. Uh, a few times they have gone into the more political side of things, like we were, and it says meat basically escalates the armed conflict in Colombia. So eating is also a political act. Sadly, this like run like once, and you cannot find it anymore. But they have banned. They helped banned. Oh, sorry. Um, Sports hunting in Colombia is banned by law. Um, Sadly, Colombia still has bullfight, but all the anti-bullfighting groups have like merged. They're pretty strong now, and it's called um, the Coalition of Colombia Without Bullfights. And uh, my friend Carlos Crespo, the guy I mentioned in the death threats, he's the head of that. Um, but now it's still, I was really happy to see things like this. This means meat and war, veganism and armed conflict in Colombia. So this is still more a little bit on the subcultural side, but there is people talking about how what we eat is linked to what's going on, to all this violence, not only to animals but to people. So I'm very glad to see that all these things have happened. So in the recent past, things, people ask me sometimes. I thought things in Colombia were better. So it goes back to what I call the war on drugs 2.0. So 1993 in December, Pablo Escobar gets killed, and things kind of cool off after that a little bit. So they didn't defeat drug trafficking. It's just that the drug traffickers learned to lay low and not to go to work with the state, and they do their thing, and they figure as long as we keep quiet, nobody pays attention. All these paramilitary groups, both legal and illegal, coalesced and they formed the AUC, 1997. Now, it's Colombia's conflict has killed about 220,000 people in 50 something years. They estimate 80% of those were killed by the AUC. So these guys are brutal. They were around for less than 10 years, technically. And in those 10 years, they killed way more people than anybody else had in the 40 something years before. And then Alvaro Uribe, he was like a pro paramilitary person. He was the one who founded those legal paramilitary groups called Convivir. He passed a law called Justicia y Paz, which ironically means justice and peace. And basically, most AUC fighters were pardoned, and he claimed it was this great victory for peace. And all he did was he bailed out his friends, and none of them went to jail. In 2016, President Santos signed a peace accord, which officially ends fighting with the guerrilla, with the FARC. The ELN still fights, but there are much smaller force. Now, interestingly, the FARC peace accord includes steps for land reform, which is how they started 50 years ago, which still has not happened. And if you ask me, I don't think it's ever going to happen. So we'll see. They're supposed to transition into a political party. One of the bad things that has happened since then is that the riot is very strong in Colombia. So ex-guerrilla fighters that have tried to reintegrate to normal life, or what we call normal life, are getting killed all the time because there is no forgiveness, really. They were like, you were a guerrilla fighter, so that's still happening. And it's a history repeating itself. In the early 90s, the FARC had tried to early 90s or mid 80s. The FARC had tried to start a political party called the UP, which is the Patriotic Union, and they were systematically killed. About 4,000 people were killed. Everybody that would run for office for that party was just erased off the face of the earth. Okay, so the war on drugs 2.0 is really what is called drug war capitalism. So they learned their lessons from the first drug war, and they figured, hey, if we keep injecting money into this war, what we can do is create conditions in which foreign companies can go in and do business, and so the expansion of neoliberal capital. So it's a mixture of policy, of militarization, so military aid, and under the table of paramilitarization. So the paramilitary groups still exist. They still do the dirty work that nobody wants to take credit for. And examples of this is Plan Colombia. Plan Colombia started in 2000, lasted until 2015. In theory, it ended. During that time, the U.S. gave the Colombian government $7.5 billion, 84% of which was spent on military aid. And it was all about, getting rid of cocaine and coca plantations and fighting drug lords and guerrillas because they were also involved in drug trafficking. But I'll give you a very glaring example of that's not the case. The case, what they want is for the conditions to be good enough so that foreign investment can be made. And the same plan or the same idea has been implemented in Mexico. So in 2008, originally it was called Plan Mexico, but then they changed the name to the Merida Initiative. And this is why the drug war in Mexico escalated. So they injected money to the military. And so anybody, for example, if you're a union organizer or if you are fighting for your land rights, all they have to do now is say, oh, that guy is involved in drug trafficking. So there was some combat and he got killed. And that has happened. And the same thing has been happening in Central America under CARSI, which is the same idea implemented in other countries like Nicaragua and Honduras. And we know what has happened. For example, Berta Cáceres was an environmental activist in Honduras. She gets killed. They say, and what did they say? Oh, it was some gang activity. Nothing to see here. They actually proved that was wrong, and 4 people linked to the government who had been trained in the U.S. ended up going down or are going down for that murder. So things are a little better in Colombia, yes. But what does this have to do with me? And by me, I mean you who are here. So the first thing is the most obvious. Colombian meat gets exported to the US. Not a lot, but some of it. And I highlighted the part of the article which says, where does this meat come from? And you see the regions with the worst paramilitary activity in the country. Chocó, Antioquia, Cordoba, like those places are just paramilitary havens. And that's where the meat that people eat here in the US that comes from Colombia, that's where it comes from. I also learned Colombia exports a lot of live cattle to the Middle East, Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, and the United Arab Emirates. So let's do an example of this drug war capitalism. There is this town. It's here, right here in the middle of the map. Mapiripan. Mapiripan was a small town in eastern Colombia. In July 1997, AUC fighters reached that town. They came in planes and landed at an airport that was exclusive use for the anti-narcotic police. So the police knew they were coming. They let them pass, and they go into this town, and they said, this town has guerrilla collaborators, so they pulled them out of their houses, and between 30 and 55 people were killed. Uh, and they were in there for like 5 days, terrorizing everybody. Uh, so the aim for that terror campaign is for people to leave. They want people to flee, fearing for their lives. And all of a sudden, these lands are again just like with the Spanish crown. They're tierra de nadie, nobody's land, right? So this company, Polygrow, is a foreign company. They go in, buy all this land for next to nothing. Um, and they also finance these paramilitary groups. And their lands, they were bought for so cheap that their value has increased 2,800% since they were bought, basically making those lands impossible for the people who used to own them to buy them back. Um, um, this is hailed as a Plan Colombia success. Why? Because before palm oil, they used to grow coca leaf around Mapiriplan. So the government sells this story of how Plan Colombia helped eradicate these coca plantations, and now you have these palm oil plantations, and people have stable jobs, and everything is legal, and everything's happy, but they don't really tell the whole story of what happened there and how that came to be. The real kicker here, or another kicker here, is that palm oil is certified RSPO and by Rainforest Alliance. The reason why is because the jungle had already been cleared for coca plantations, so they didn't technically cut down more jungle to grow this palm oil. So it's certified that they didn't destroy more rainforest because of this. Um, this is just an example, but this happens quite a bit, right? So you can see this map on the right. The biggest palm oil plantations in Colombia are in red, and the regions with the most paramilitary activity are these yellow regions. And you can see they're all basically on top of each other. So that's what's happening. That's your drug war capitalism at work. There are no plantations in Chocó, which is this region over here, but there is a reason why there was a big paramilitary activity in this region, is because right next to it is the Panama Canal, which was supposed to go back to Panama in 1999, and one of the plans they had was to make a new canal down this way, and so they needed that people to leave. How do they make them leave? Well, you scare them to death. That's what they were trying to do. Another example of how things work now is bananas. So United Fruit Company has been in Colombia for over 100 years. They have a very strong documented anti-union activity. As I said before, being a union organizer in Colombia is one of the most dangerous jobs there is. You're gonna be labeled a communist, a guerrilla sympathizer, and they're just gonna use that excuse to kill you. It happens all the time, not just in bananas, but in just about any business. The history of the United Fruit Company in Colombia is pretty bad. 1928, there was a strike against them. The company complained to the U.S. government. The U.S. government told the Colombian government, if you don't end the strike, we'll invade the region with U.S. Marines. And in response, the Colombian government went and ended the strike with violence. And it's estimated about 1,000 people were killed. Now, United Fruit Company morphed into what is now Chiquita Banana, and Chiquita was found guilty of financing the AUC. They paid about $1.7 million to them after, and it was a much bigger deal in the courts here in the US because all those payments happened after 9/11, which is when the AUC was designated as a terrorist organization. So they got into quite a bit of trouble for that. They only paid fines. Nobody went to jail. And Chiquita also was found to have used one of their dogs to receive weapons that were used by the AUC against the general population and union organizers. So that's the story with Chiquita. So some conclusions is internal conflict shapes the way we approach activism. So if we had centered just on animals, we wouldn't have reached a lot of people, because a lot of people were more what's happening in this war. Don't tell me to care about animals, but we found a way to make it work. The land and who owns it, what is done with it, is directly related to what happens to animals and humans, and is one of the drivers of internal conflict. And this happens in other places with internal conflict too. Think about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's about land. It's about who owns that land. What are they doing with it? Things like this. Safety hinders what we can do as activists. And that's one of the things I really want you to think about. I don't think we in this country have a activist meeting and we think nobody's gonna make it home. That's the reality out there. Lots of people, environmental activists, human rights activists in Central South America, they get killed all the time. It's a real thing. And just one more dig against the U.S. government. The foreign policy of the United States is driven by neoliberal economics. It's not about safety. The war on drugs is not about your safety or my safety. It's about money. It's who's making money and who's keeping it. I'll end before we go into Q&A. Some of the books I've read about this. There is a star right here in the Killing Pablo book. This book is garbage. It's just this very, American adventure in South America. But one of the only positive things it has is actually it mentions how the DEA and Los Pepes were involved and how they financed each other and how they financed them, which is quite an admission, to be honest. That's all I have. So we can go to questions now.